Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm joined by Alexei, one of the co-founders of BOB, the gateway to Bitcoin DeFi. Alexei, thanks a lot for your time today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Why don't we start with a quick background so that we know your crypto story a little bit and why you're building in Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, I've been doing this for quite a while. I got into Bitcoin over 10 years ago, mainly through research. I discovered Bitcoin doing a bachelor's thesis, and then kind of, basically have been doing nothing else ever since. I really got excited about, of course, the tech, the financial aspect. But what I really was interested in was censorship resistance. I was really into IT security, and kind of, a lot of my friends and colleagues would do like capture the flag hackathons and so on. Obviously, we're very much in favor of preventing censorship on the internet, privacy, security, and really got excited about Namecoin, actually, the first altcoin. And that kind of then took me to realize, well, Namecoin didn't really work. I was trying to fix the internet, like the DNS issue, and like prevent squatting and like provide an alternative to the ICANN. But that didn't work. Realized like that merge mining was kind of one of the issues, dug into merge mining, and then ended up writing one of the first research papers on like, well, what is merge mining? How does it work? What are the pros and cons? Like really diving deeper into the mechanism. It was an interesting time because like back then you still had the community built things, discussions were in forums, there was no like research really being done. Things were built and then research was catching up. You'd see a system. Back then, Bitcoin wasn't proven to be secure even in terms of academic purposes. There was no like super secure Bitcoin model. That literally came out later that year by Agelos Kayas, who then was at IOHK and did a lot of work at Cardano. And it was quite fun. And I ended up, working in a research center, spending a lot of time on like merge mining analysis, looking at meta protocols on Bitcoin, and kind of trying to figure out what else can we do on top of Bitcoin. Obviously proposed some wild fork ideas, which obviously got nowhere. And I then got offered a position at Imperial College in London to do a PhD focusing on, it started with Lightning actually, and like Bitcoin layer 2s, but more for payments. And it was sponsored by blockchain.com. And after the whole block size wars, I think everybody was quite disillusioned of, changing Bitcoin and like Lightning. Back then, we had also realized it wouldn't really scale and achieve what we wanted to do. Our goal was really to allow people to use Bitcoin the same way that people were starting to use Ethereum with smart contracts. And so we started looking into, well, how do we bridge Bitcoin either to Ethereum or create a smart contract layer around Bitcoin without forking it? And that's kind of, what ultimately led to us spinning out. I met Dominic, my co-founder, in the lab. He was the ETH guy. Like I was always the Bitcoin guy. And he was the first person I knew in crypto that came into crypto through Ethereum, not Bitcoin, which was for me back then quite fascinating. And he was working on like smart contract design, smart contract languages, collateralization, very early kind of stages of DeFi back in the day. And that was in 2017, 18. And we basically started working together and ended up working quite a bit on bridges, layer 2s, wrote together a paper on how to bridge Bitcoin to Ethereum in a truly secure way using over-collateralization. So think like make your DAO's collateral model, but for bridges. People now call it restaking. That bridge is actually still in production and used across multiple networks. It's very secure, just doesn't scale very well because of the capital costs you have on top. And that's kind of the backstory. So essentially, it summarized a random walk in crypto research, always basically trying to do something more with Bitcoin. I used to, get uninvited from Bitcoin Maxi conferences because I was talking about using Bitcoin on other chains, bridges, and interoperability. And then obviously when Rob and Linus came up with the idea of how we like BitVM, the concept, and then we started working together on, well, how do we build bridges and layer 2s using BitVM, and wrote the BitVM 2 design, which is basically, the basis now for most Bitcoin layer 2s that are working on BitVM. That's when suddenly all the Bitcoin maxis started like inviting us back to the conferences, and now because it kind of we transitioned to being okay again to work on Bitcoin research and do more. And that's essentially, where Bob is positioned, really at the intersection of Bitcoin as a network for security and the assets, but really the functionality, the versatility of Ethereum and other modern smart contract chains.
I mean, like your background in Bitcoin, of course, justifies the Bitcoin focus. But when I think about DeFi, like everyone thinks about Ethereum, right? Because Ethereum kind of invented smart contracts and brought that to crypto. So how did you decide to choose, like, okay, I'm going to work on Bitcoin and not Ethereum because that's where all of the DeFi was happening? Like, to me, that sounds like a very bold choice because there's this one network where everyone is, kind of moving towards and starting this new movement of DeFi, whereas Bitcoin is like even today, there's some friction to like move towards DeFi or like you said, some sort of friction towards bridges and just doing more with Bitcoin as we see on Ethereum.
Well, so I passed on this Ethereum ICO, and that was the moment I learned not to be a maxi.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, you could say I'm a Bitcoin maxi because I really I've been working on Bitcoin and trying to improve it for the last decade. But I'm not a laser eye maxi that refuses to accept other networks. Like I use Ethereum very frequently, almost every day. I've used that for a long, long time, right? I really love DeFi. I think DeFi is much better than centralized exchanges. I had the chance to actually, work on some very, very early Ethereum rollup designs. In fact, like together with Rami, who now leads a lot of the tech at Boundless and Risk Zero, I had a chance to collaborate with him on the arguably first paper that described how to do an ETH rollup. So we've always been on this intersection. I mean, my PhD actually focused on cross-chain bridges for Bitcoin, but also other networks. And it started with Bitcoin, and then it obviously went broader, and we started looking at bridges overall. So it's always been on the intersection, right? It's always been like the focus has always been, okay, how do we make Bitcoin more useful? How do we unlock more utility? And naturally, like it was on Ethereum. So when we were designing this first trust minimized Bitcoin bridge, it was really to take Bitcoin and bridge it over to ETH in the most secure way possible, so you could use Bitcoin on Ethereum. And literally a few weeks after we presented that paper at like Scaling Bitcoin, which was the best Bitcoin research conference back in the day, RABBTC launched. That was in 2018 as a centralized version. And obviously it worked really, really well. And, it took us some time also to accept that research is one thing, but it has to be practical. You have to kind of, figure out how people can actually use it as a product.
The market always moves before the tech does, right? So like Wrap Bitcoin came first, and then like while you were trying to figure out how to get native Bitcoin on different blockchains, market moved towards Wrap Bitcoin because the demand was just higher. So when I was like looking at Bob, a good mental framework, I feel like today people are talking about stable chains, right? Like blockchains purpose built for stablecoins. I feel like Bob also fits that framework, but for Bitcoin. Like you're basically trying to unlock different use cases for Bitcoin that may or may not be possible on other chains because they're just not built for like native Bitcoin utility or native Bitcoin DeFi. Is that a good framework?
That's a very good way to describe it. It's really about unlocking utility for Bitcoin and customizing the system, providing tools and infrastructure to unlock new use cases in a much more secure way than we can today, essentially. But there's like two parts to this, right? I mean, Dominic and I, we call ourselves recovering academics. We spent some time in academia and we left, right? We kind of dropped out of our PhDs. We did finish the thesis eventually. I mean, might as well. But we started the company 2 years into our PhDs, realizing that, academia is great, but you stop when it gets really interesting. Once you have the research done, you just move on to the next thing and you don't build it. And we've taken a very pragmatic, and honestly, we've learned it the very hard way as well in practice. Like we started building a project called Interlay, which had the vision of, connecting Bitcoin to other networks and bridging BTC into other chains. And we built on Polkadot, and we kind of got stuck there struggling with like the tech usability of it. So like the tech was great. Substrate, Polkadot's tech is really good. They were quite ahead of their time in terms of the ideas they had. But go to market was flawed. The tooling was flawed. You were just stuck in, and you couldn't really onboard users because the network launch had no wallet, right? And so we really got that, the last, ounce of like, oh, let's launch it and people will come for the tech. We just got that beaten out of us very, very early on. So when you look at Bob, we took a very pragmatic approach to, having very strong research focus and very strong opinions on how Bitcoin should be used in DeFi in the future with BitVM, and the network should have Bitcoin security. You should not have to trust anybody to use your Bitcoin in DeFi. It should be native, just like ETH on Arbitrum is considered native, right? It's not called ARB-ETH, it's ETH. Bitcoin on Bob will be BTC. It's not going to be Bob BTC. It's going to be native, and that's where BitVM comes into play with the same technology that we use in Arbitrum, but really engineered into Bitcoin script today. But at the same time, you have to build a product, right? You can build all the tech you like, but if nobody's there to use it, what's the point? And Bob has really taken the approach of going to mainnet very quickly, starting to onboard projects, work with new teams, and explore like, okay, well, what do people actually want? And what they want is easy access to Bitcoin yield. That's what people really, really care about. And that's what we've been building on. So if you look at Bob and in the past like months, we've built tier one infrastructure. We've onboarded tier one DeFi partners to provide the most secure and reliable way for existing Bitcoin holders, right? And that includes users of Solana, Ethereum, but also new users that have never touched DeFi before. Let them put their Bitcoin to work, borrow against it, deploy into yield vaults, and like earn on their BTC and stake it on Bob. But at the same time, we've also started looking towards other chains because we see that, every big chain is looking to run a Bitcoin strategy. Everybody's fighting for Bitcoin liquidity. Well, it would be a shame if, you could have all these cool things on Bob, but there's other cool things on other chains. And if you have to use different bridges and the UX is terrible, it feels like we're missing out there. We're not contributing to the growth of Bitcoin DeFi if we don't fix that problem as well. And so what we've done is we've kind of added a layer on top of Bob that allows you to one-click deploy from Bitcoin, routed through Bob into any chain with one Bitcoin transaction. And that's, I think, where we're getting to this interoperability play here. Bob is positioned as the gateway to Bitcoin DeFi, where on Bob, you'll have curated strategies, curated DeFi apps that specialize and really make a bet on Bitcoin. But at the same time, we allow users to deploy into any app that has Bitcoin as an asset supported, whether it's on ETH-based Solana BNB chain, and you only need one transaction to complete any of these actions. So that's kind of the vision of really abstracting complexity. So, we not only cater to existing DeFi users on Ethereum, on Solana, who are, yes, they're familiar with bridges, although everybody hates them, but we can actually bring on the hundreds of millions of Bitcoin holders that don't use DeFi today, and they're on centralized exchanges, but they're ready to make that step if the UX is good enough.
I mean, so before our recording, I was doing some research on Bob, right? So it sounds like there were a lot of Bitcoin L2s in general, like last year. But of course, not a lot of them worked out, and there was more hype than substance, right? But looking at Bob's stats, like Bob is the number 3 roll up in terms of BTC liquidity, only behind Arbitrum and Base. And you guys have a higher percentage of quality DeFi users than most chains. So clearly, like as a Bitcoin L2, you guys have done something right. So I of course want to get into like what did other Bitcoin L2s not do so well, but like what do you think worked out for you that others could not crack?
So Bitcoin is it's a really difficult beast to tame, and on one hand, there's a very strong desire within the core community to have a secure solution, build very good tech, build for ethos. And it's very easy to get really, dragged into into these ethical discussions about whether Bitcoin should be changed, whether we should introduce new changes, whether any change to clients or transaction kind of acceptance rules is good or bad. What's exactly happening right now? And at the same time, everybody wants it, right? Like there's so much demand for it among institutions, retail users, DeFi users. And there is obviously the other side. Like you can not only, instead of like, if you think of it like in a scale, you can go very like on the left side, which is only tech, or you can go on the other side, which is like pure marketing, because it's Bitcoin. It's so easy to sell it, so easy to hype up people about it without any substance. And a lot of teams have kind of like fallen into one of these two categories, right? Either they're not live on mainnet yet, and there's some really, really good teams that we collaborate with on the research, and that we respect a lot for their tech contributions. And I think there's some really, really smart people working on this. My concern is that there's mistakes happening that happen with Lightning, where we're building for ethos, we're not building for users, we're building in a very opinionated manner without talking to people what they really want and what they care about, and not listening to what the market tells us. And on the other side, you have a lot of teams that just, pivoted into Bitcoin for the narrative because they saw that that's how they could raise money. That's, where there was a lot of attention. And the approach was, well, let's raise a ton of money, let's hype it up and then see what we can do. The problem is, if you've not worked with Bitcoin before, if you don't understand how it works, you don't understand like how to navigate the space, and you don't have a good reputation for institutions to work with you, you're going to have a really, really hard time. And, I think there's only a few teams that have managed to kind of find the right balance between building the products, going to market fast, taking some risks. Obviously, not everything works out. I mean, what we basically do is we ship new versions of products and iterate every few weeks, every few months to get feedback. But at the same time, you have to have a really strong basis in terms of tech and research that you can build upon.
I mean,
And I think that's
what sort of like happened last year? Like there were a lot of Bitcoin L2s that launched. Like you said, some of them were purely tech, some of them were purely marketing. How many actually like succeeded? How many have stuck around? Because I don't see too many actually being too active, right? Like Bob is of course an outlier here, but what happened to all the other ones?
Well, I mean, you said like there was some with really good tech that have launched, but that's the problem. They haven't launched, right?
Okay.
It's like a year and a half, 2 years in, and there's some projects that are still in dev and testnet mode. And I get that it's like really, really hard. And if we're really honest and, critique what critique is due, but in this case, ETH took 5 years to have real rollups. We're like 1.5 years in maybe from BitVM 2, and we had like this blueprint that we wrote together with Robin, like here's how you build it. So already moving super fast that people have testnets, but it's not there. And of course, the expectations are super high. People want to see it on mainnet. So a lot of teams haven't launched yet, and they're building the tech.
On the other side, like there were teams that were using it as a go-to-market strategy, right? Like they were purely EVM rollups, but then there was some sort of like Bitcoin connection. I guess like that did not work out as well.
There's nothing wrong in using the EVM. I think apart from maybe one or two, everybody's accepted that EVM is the best execution environment today, right? Everybody's accepted that. But, just kind of paying a few big miners or whales to put like some Bitcoin into self-custody in like, and make it look like it's there on like, some DeFi Llama or like L2Beat or like, I don't know, CoinGecko or the platforms or on their own website, and claiming that, oh, we've unlocked so many users in TVL, only for people to realize, and market smart, only for people to realize that that's not the case. I mean, that's how it started. The first coin that launched, and I'm not going to name any names here, but the first thing that went live in the Bitcoin L2 space, what they did was fake TVL. And it wasn't real, like it wasn't on chain. And that's how Bitcoin L2 launches started off, right? In a very negative way. And then you had scams that claimed they were like a real Bitcoin ZK rollup, which had nothing to do with ZK proofs or anything. So I feel like, it was such a big hype topic that you had a lot of mess kind of, a lot of bad things move in. And the difference here between ETH rollups and Bitcoin rollups is that ETH rollups, all of them took the approach of let's launch faster, something at least, and then we'll ship the tech gradually, right? And because if you look at how many rollups up until recently were not even real rollups on Ethereum on L2Beat, kind of shows that, people chose the approach like let's go live and kind of, get things to market, because there was a market already there, and they were all fighting for DFAPs on Ethereum. And in Bitcoin, you either had teams, like the vast majority of teams just launched some random chains. We have nothing to do with Bitcoin and didn't even have the research, right? I mean, Bob launched as an ETH rollup to Bootstrap, but we were very open about it. We said, look, we're a hybrid. We're not just Bitcoin. We're literally in the intersection. That's where we're on Ethereum. And here's what we do for Bitcoin. And it was a very clear thesis. Whereas many teams said, oh, we're Bitcoin secure, we're ZK rollup, and actually it wasn't. And then obviously market sees that and they kind of flopped and there's nothing there. And the good teams haven't just launched, right? The problem was that the good teams were just not even on mainnet. And that's something, honestly, we've been struggling with. Like, because Bitcoin L2s, I feel, as you said, they've had like a bad taste to it, because it's like there was so much nonsense there. And only now you see some really like solid launches happening, and like the better teams coming out finally to kind of present what they've been building. And we're still in the early stages on the tech side.
I mean, so how do we cross the chasm on the tech side? Like, it sounds like BitVM is the piece of technology that everyone was waiting for, and the maturity of that tech will probably like move Bitcoin rollups to actual Bitcoin rollups from like Ethereum rollups that they are today.
Well, Bob's the only ETH rollup, right? So Bob made a clear design choice to build a hybrid. So we came up with a completely new model of a hybrid chain design that inherits security from both Ethereum and Bitcoin. Or the way it works is we're an ETH rollup that has Bitcoin finality. So we choose Bitcoin as the finality provider, but we're a ZK rollup, or specifically a hybrid ZK rollup on Ethereum, where we submit optimistic commitments to ETH. And then if challenged, we submit a ZK proof. But then that ZK proof is also used on the Bitcoin side. And on the Bitcoin side, what we do is we have Bitcoin finality from Bitcoin staking and checkpointing. And that allows us to create a native Bitcoin bridge. So the way you think about it is an ETH rollup is inheriting security from Ethereum and finality, and that's why it has a native bridge. Bob uses Bitcoin as the security anchor, as a finality anchor, and can have native bridges not only to ETH, but also to Bitcoin, and in theory, any other smart contract chain that can read the Bitcoin state. If you can read the Bitcoin state, you can check that Bob has finalized, and you can build a native bridge to the network. So we can connect to all these different networks and accept deposits and let them trade against Bitcoin, the biggest liquidity pool in the market. But that's a very big design choice. And there's been teams that have copied this design, like Starkin and Hemi, and not, like, it's very fair to say, like, I mean, I think it's cool that people adopt the same design of the hybrid approach. They're the teams that I'm talking about, they're not even rollups. They're just standalone chains with like one sign and multisig that pretend to be decentralized. So it's like very far away from anything that's Bitcoin or Ethereum. It's just like, let's get something to market and hype it up. So yeah, I think, how do we actually get to this kind of ultimate goal of having, real Bitcoin rollups and real Bitcoin security? Well, there is no way around really just getting the tech right. Like, we have these things on testnet. And
what is that tech
yeah.
piece? Like, for someone who is not aware of the details, what is that tech piece that actually allows you to build a Bitcoin rollup?
It's like the funny part is it's literally the same thing that Arbitrum uses. It's fraud proofs,
Okay.
right? But hacked into Bitcoin. Like, the tricky bit is not, how do we make fraud proofs work? That's very well understood. ZK rollups, very well understood at this point. The tricky bit is, well, how do we hack this into Bitcoin script? And that's what really is the innovation in BitVM, right? What BitVM does is it takes the EVM, for example, right, or any arbitrary program, and first we pre-process it, we pack it in a ZK proof. So you have a ZK snark verify, which is constant size at the end, right? That's what you want to check. You want to check, well, when I tell you that, the Bob rollup has correctly executed, you want to verify the ZK proof. And ideally, you want to do this on Bitcoin, just like Ethereum can verify ZK proofs in smart contracts, but Bitcoin can't. And what many people don't know is that everybody thinks, Bitcoin has no smart contracts, and that's why it cannot verify ZK proofs. That's not correct, though. Bitcoin has scripting. The problem is that it's very basic. So think of it this way. Something that's 5 lines of code in Solidity is 1,000 lines of code in Bitcoin script. So you can build everything you want in Bitcoin script, arbitrary programs. The problem is they're just too big to fit into a block. So what we have right now is we take this Bob state, we generate a ZK proof, and the verifier that checks the ZK proof is implemented in Bitcoin script, in the Bitcoin language. But it's like a gigabyte in size. So you cannot plug it in a block. So what we do is we chunk it up into many small pieces such that each individual sub program can actually fit into a block. And then we run fraud proofs. So I say, hey, I did everything right. And, it's all in the public. You can check that, does the ZK proof compute on your local machine? It's very easy to do. And if it doesn't, you challenge me. And then we basically chain Bitcoin transactions in a smart way such that you can exactly pinpoint where did I change the proof to cheat you. Just like Arbitrum does this. And there's different models there, but essentially you take the concepts of ETH rollups, fraud proofs, and stick it into Bitcoin script. And that's essentially what BitVM does. So optimistic fraud proofs. And at this point it works. It's on testnet. And now you have things like BitVM 3, which is like more optimized and like different flavors. And we're kind of, starting to branch out into optimizing different things. And that's where kind of, again, our opinion as Bob is a bit different to many of the other teams. We think the problem won't be just like it works. Yes, we can make it 100x more like cheaper. But the problem isn't making it isn't making it cheaper. It's getting institutions and validators and DeFi protocols to accept this. And that's what we're kind of pushing forwards. And I think, the missing puzzle piece here is just gradually to educate more stakers, validators, custodians about how BitVM works, get it to mainnet, and get them to run it. And that's why we've actually founded an institutional working group with 20 plus members, which count market makers like Wintermute, custodians like Anchorage, validators like P2P, to get them to run this on testnet and gradually scale it up. So once we go to mainnet with this, even if it's maybe not the most optimized version on day one, it just works because the go-to-market approach here is, okay, you have this BitVM bridge, or this BitVM rollup bridge that is run by institutions, the same institutions that run wrap Bitcoin bridges already. So, you assume anyway that they won't attack you. But the difference is that even if they wanted to, they can't because there is good tech underneath. But you kind of, you don't so you kind of have a very similar trust assumption as in wrap BTC on day one, plus the tech. But tech on day one is very risky. People don't want to use the newest shiny tech with a lot of Bitcoin. And so the missing puzzle piece, really, the way that we get real Bitcoin rollups is to work with institutions and get them to run this on mainnet and take this to production. And that's what we've been working on over the past few months. And we have institutions running this on testnet, and we're hoping to get this live by the end of the year, if latest in Q1, with day one institutional support. And then we believe, users, DeFi protocols will be much more inclined to integrate this if they see, oh, it's the same institutions that I already work with, but they're running this new tech. Then, oh, there's a bunch of new guys and Bob running this, and they're trying to sell me this new fancy technology.
So how do you see the growth of wrapped Bitcoin in general? Like wrapped Bitcoin has been a big part of DeFi for the last 7 or 8 years, right? And there's more than 40 billion in wrapped Bitcoin across DeFi. So does that actually validate your thesis that Bitcoin is needed across DeFi? Or do you think in a way the market has accepted that, okay, wrapped Bitcoin is good enough. We may or may not need native Bitcoin, which is what you're trying to solve with like BitVM and actual proper security.
So, I mean, wrap BTC is very important for DeFi, right? And I myself was one of the people that would go out in my early research days and spread FUD about wrap BTC. Oh my God, there's $10 billion worth of Bitcoin at risk. You should not wrap it. But I said, I admit that was wrong, right? I'm a recovering academic. We realized that, Bitcoin, the wrap BTC consortium wasn't trying to steal anyone's money, of course. They were trying to use the tools they had to build the best possible way to put Bitcoin into DeFi. And if you see it from that perspective, we've come very, very far. It's a very good solution. It works flawlessly over the last, 5, 6, 7 years. It's great. And without it, we would not have Bitcoin DeFi today at all. So I think the way forward is not trying to replace existing wrap Bitcoin solutions that have found adoption, but again, work with these custodians, these issuers, and explain to them, look, BitVM is essentially just a better way to custody Bitcoin. Just like you upgraded from simple multisigs to multi-party MPC computation MPC wallets, eventually it's time to upgrade to BitVM, where the difference is multisigs and MPC wallets, majority needs to be honest, you can steal. Right? Multisigs don't scale. You have a few signers. MPC means you have a lot of signers, but still, honest majority. BitVM, you only need one honest player. Very big security improvement. let's get to that point where they adopt this. And it's going to take a long time, 100% to get RapidDC upgraded to this. But maybe we can gradually get there. And I think they'll exist in parallel where you'll have, eventually I think, BitVM will replace all of the RapidDC solutions, but not the way we think. They'll still have different versions run by different institutions and different businesses, but they'll just use BitVM at the core.
I mean, I was curious to ask how has the reception been by the institutions? Because generally, institutions, if there's no need to change, they're very slow to move, especially with something that's already working, right? So, do they see this as a clear path towards safer and more native Bitcoin, or do they see this as okay, this works right now, but maybe we need 3 more years of legitimacy before we can actually move our entire business to this model now?
Well, I mean, these two things aren't really two controversial opinions, right? So what I'll say is that institutions, they see that one of the biggest blockers for mass Bitcoin DeFi adoption is that it's still perceived to be risky because it's not native, right? That's like the most surprising thing I've been hearing over the last 2 or 3 years when we talk with institutions, with neobanks, with new wallets, new institutional players that have a lot of retail users. When I ask them, well, why don't you guys offer, yield on Bitcoin? You have yield on ETH, you have stablecoin yields. Why not Bitcoin? The answer is it's too risky. They don't know which wrap Bitcoin version to use on which chains. It's everywhere, fragmented, doesn't feel right. They want native Bitcoin yield. That's why Babylon was so successful in getting so much liquidity, because it is on Bitcoin native. So I think consensus is BitVM needs to happen, or whatever it is, whether it's BitVM or whatever you want to call it. We need native Bitcoin DeFi the same way, right? We have native ETH DeFi. But will they switch in a month? No, right? It's new technology. It'll take time. But again, if you look at this institutional BitVM alliance that we operate, it's called BitVM/ACC, like BitVM Accelerated. You have market makers, custodians in there. You have asset issuers for wrap Bitcoin assets, part of that alliance, because they all see that we need to bridge this gap of making Bitcoin DeFi native, but it will take time. And that's our job as Bob, is to take it to market, work with these projects to address their concerns, make sure that this design works with DeFi. The worst we could do is build something in our ivory tower, tell people, listen, this is the new way to use Bitcoin DeFi, but you have to change how DeFi works because it doesn't work with our bridge. It doesn't work, right? So it's going to take some time naturally. But I mean, but again, the question is, what does that mean? It's not like we're going to be stuck at $1 million in TVL and BitVM for years. No. What I'm talking about, I think we'll hit probably 100 million by end of next year is a good target. Can't go much faster, but people learn to trust things. If there's a lot of liquidity in something over time, it starts to grow, right? You hit this kind of 100 mil over a couple of months threshold, and then it starts to really skyrocket.
I mean, crypto is all about network effects, right? So if something starts working, it grows exponentially. And I was talking to one of the Bitcoin bridge builders in the ecosystem, and we were talking about how the general consensus is that Bitcoin holders do not move their funds too often, right? And we eventually concluded that it's because there just aren't enough good DeFi apps for Bitcoin to be useful. What's your take on that? Are there enough Bitcoin applications where holders can actually earn yield safely, or do you think the ecosystem is still in its early days and maybe we need more time for it to mature?
Well, I'll answer this in two ways. First of all, I will challenge. I suspect I know about what you mean, like a Bitcoin holder. You mean people who have it in their ledger, who are not DeFi users, right?
Yeah, someone like me who's just holding Bitcoin and not really doing anything with it, right? I'm waiting for the day it hits 1 million, and then I'd probably not even sell it then.
And fair enough. And I think, everybody has a risk profile, right? If Bitcoin is like gold for you and that's what you use it for, well, you might not want to use it in DeFi. Maybe you will, however, eventually want to use it as collateral to borrow against it. And okay, well, how do we get someone like you to feel comfortable? Well, it has to be easy to use and it has to be native and secure. And the only way that you will trust this, because I'm not sure if you're going to go dig through the BitVM code. No, it has to be used by a lot of people, supported by institutions over time, that there's validation by a lot of people that this works. And then you might say, well, I want to borrow some stable coins against my BTC at a low LTV ratio, because why not? I know it won't get hacked, right? This is battle test. That's why, if you're a person who's very risk averse and you just have paper wallets or hard wallets, okay, but then DeFi is not for you. But, we look at people who are open to DeFi, are open to actually using their Bitcoin for something. But then, the question is who that profile is not just, restricted to, again, a Bitcoin only holder. I'd argue 90% of people who use DeFi today have Bitcoin. And there's $40 billion worth of RAB BTC across different chains. That's already a pretty big market. If you look at the DeFi TVL in total, that's a pretty big chunk of DeFi TVL that we count as Solana, ETH based TVL. That's in Bitcoin, RAB, but it's Bitcoin. So I would say there's a very big market and there's a lot of opportunities to use Bitcoin in DeFi today, but the UX is really bad. It sucks. There's 50 different bridges, very hard to get in. There's no wallet support. Up until a year ago, there were no Bitcoin browser wallets. Now we have Phantom, Binance Wallet, Coinbase Wallet, OKX Wallet, MetaMask is adding native Bitcoin support. Everybody's rushing to capture the market. So right now it's like just a matter of who will be there to offer a good user experience to the people who want to use BTC. And again, who is the first group of people that will move to DeFi? It's the people who use Bitcoin on centralized exchanges, who put it, to earn a bit yield there, who use it on Binance, Coinbase, or on other smaller DEX centralized platforms, or neobanks. They'll be the first to come on board. The last people will be obviously the ones that see Bitcoin as a long-term investment, set and forget, don't touch it. But that's fine, right? That's very well acceptable.
There's also a case to be made about getting the right integrations for Bitcoin. Like, for example, if Bitcoin lending was integrated in like Ledger, a lot of people would just, click a button and do it. But because right now they have to figure out like which bridge to use, which people do not trust, and Bitcoin holders are especially like more security focused, like they don't want to use bridges. So there's a world where the right integrations will actually unlock a lot of like Bitcoin TVL. And if you look at the DeFi Mullet thesis, where Coinbase is working with Morpho, like Coinbase is basically providing Bitcoin-backed loans through Morpho, and that's seeing like almost 600 million or more in TVL already. So what are your thoughts on like that sort of integration? Like maybe the right type of integration with institutions will actually get Bitcoin products into the hands of the right users.
100%. I mean, that's literally the thesis that we have for like Bob as a gateway to Bitcoin DeFi, right? It's a B2B play to distribution channels. Ledger, for example, is a bigger investor in Bob. And we, of course, we're looking to get Ledger Live to support ways for users to use Bitcoin DeFi. Right now, you can already go from Ledger, like Bitcoin in your Bitcoin Ledger app, to Bitcoin and DeFi also in your Ledger app, but you have to go like through hoops. It's not in Ledger Live. You have to go to the Bob website, and you can stay within Ledger, but you go through the Bob website. The goal is like get that into Ledger Live, because then like if it's shown on Ledger, I'm much more likely to use it because I don't have to go
That's basically where my
else.
Bitcoin is held, right? So I can just click a button and be done with it, rather than connecting my wallet with 10 different websites while I figure out how everything works. Like most people will not do it, and that's not the right way to get adoption in crypto, arguably.
Yeah. And again, and I think, the path to achieving this is twofold. Offer really reliable, good yield sources that are sustainable and long-term, and work with tier one apps to build an ecosystem around Bitcoin LSTs, because again, yield is really, really the driver for people to move their Bitcoin. Why otherwise, like, okay, getting a loan maybe, but and yield.
I mean, so would you say there is good Bitcoin yield today in the ecosystem?
I think right now we're still quite early. So the hunt for like Bitcoin has no native yield in that sense. It has mining, but the problem with mining, of tokenizing hash rate, has always been that you're buying into the risk of that data center, of that enterprise. To be fair, it's not too different than to buying into the risk of delegating to a validator.
I mean, it's technically the same.
But running a validator, is a bit. It's less risky. It's much easier than running a Bitcoin mining farm. Why? Because you just in your server you can migrate it. It's software, and yes, you have servers, but gets shut down, it's much more accessible than Bitcoin mining farms where you have these big containers. Like they're moved around, but it's perceived as more risk. And cloud mining on Bitcoin and altcoins with like fake hash rate was like one of the first crypto scams. So that's like, there is some sour taste from back in the days, but it's coming back. Like I'm pretty sure we'll see tokenized hash rate products start being more and more adopted as people start to get creative with ways to find Bitcoin yield in a sustainable way. Right now, you have three options. You can supply Bitcoin in wrapped form into lending, which doesn't yield a lot. It will yield more if there were people borrowing BTC. But why do you borrow Bitcoin? Only if you want to leverage up on a Bitcoin yield position, so you loop. Well, where do we have Bitcoin yield right now? You have it in DeFi, which is mostly token farming on different chains, right? You have a lot of big networks throwing a lot of incentives, on this. You have Babylon, right, as like Bitcoin staking, but it's still very early. It doesn't really yield yet. The integrations are not fully complete, right? Bob will be one of the yield sources there. So the fees that our chain makes will contribute to native yield on the BTC used on Bob, but it's still early. So that is like a yield source that's certainly coming, but it works really well if there's DeFi activity. And for DeFi activity on Bob to happen, you need Bitcoin yields. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. And then the last one is, off-chain yields. Basically what Ethena has been offering for stablecoins, the same thing for Bitcoin. It comes with a risk. There's a risk premium because you're trusting, off-chain actors, you're trusting market makers and exchanges. But that obviously can generate very scalable and sustainable long-term yields if you're okay with that risk. So right now we're in this kind of like Web 2.5 mode. Just like you see with stablecoins, Bitcoin is going to go through the same thing, gradually scale up, while you have, and I think the biggest opportunity for on-chain Bitcoin yield are perps.
Okay.
And futures markets on-chain. And we see them grow with Hyperliquid, with Lighter, with Jupiter, with GMX. They will be growing more and more. And the more they scale, the more we can raise the caps on these vaults that deposit Bitcoin into these strategies on-chain and not off-chain. So I think, from our perspective, the go-to-market here looks like spin up different strategies, and that's what's happening on Bar as we speak. We're launching different vaults that allow you to one-click deploy into different yield opportunities. Some are looking for farming yield across different chains in DeFi. Some are very, very low risk on Bob that supply into big lending protocols, like, for example, Avid that we've been working with to deploy to Bob. And then there's going to be the more risky ones where they deploy off-chain or they deploy into on-chain perp markets. And what we expect to happen is the off-chain ones will grow. That will kickstart looping, which will start growing the passive, really risk-averse ones, which is supply Bitcoin that is then borrowed. But as the on-chain perp markets start growing, we can move liquidity from off-chain strategies into off-chain. And it won't be even us, the market makers, the curators of these strategies will be inclined to do so because on-chain is so much more efficient, more transparent. It's just better. And it's also less risk for them.
Yeah. And in the current state of things, it sounds like, of course, Bitcoin demand from DeFi will come if there's yield. And you're still figuring out ways to generate yield, right? Like, is that the right description of the current state of Bitcoin DeFi?
I think right now, in the next 12 months, whoever figures out we know how to make yield on Bitcoin and off-chain strategies. That we know. These funds have been operating for years. What has changed is the regulatory landscape allows us to democratize access. Previously, this was only accessible to fund managers. Now, by tokenizing these vaults, any user who has BTC and is okay with the risk, and again, please do your own research, where there's yield, there's risk. The higher the yield, likely the higher the risk, and you need to understand what the risks are, and we'll do our best to work with curators and risk assessors to provide you with that information. But still, do your own research. I have to say that naturally. But the cool thing is we're democratizing access. Anyone now can get access to these yields. And you can use, and of course, the goal is to get as close as possible to the standards we see in DeFi. So transparency reports, proof of reserves are a must, right? Without that, no, not acceptable.
So if you had to actually suggest 3 applications on Bob that users could use today, what would they be?
So, I mean, I think, again, please like do your own research. I think what you can look at right now are Bitcoin LSTs that, deposit into Babylon. And that's very low risk, very passive yield. That's around like 0.5 to 0.8%. And it varies. And it's mainly still like incentivized. It's a preparation of like Bitcoin staking going fully live and like Bob fees starting to feed into that. And then you can look at, projects like Solve that have different vaults. Like Solve has a Jupiter vault live on Bob that, trades on Jupiter and yields what, 5 to 8% on average. I mean, you have to keep an eye on like the 30-day trailing kind of performance naturally or like 7-day trailing performance to be sure. And then there is like strategies that they have a BTC plus vault, which kind of mixes, it's a multi-strategy vault that kind of course you have to trust Solve. So you need to do your own research, be okay with that trust model. And what then I'd look out for next are additional vaults that will be deploying into things like Uniswap, Aave on Bob, but also things like our multi-chain Bitcoin Intense Bridge, where we had a lot of swap volume, which is where Bitcoin is only used for rebalancing, right? And you can clearly trace the transactions. And then also like MEV vaults that, handle rebalancing of pools, arbitrage, liquidations on Bob under the hood. So the goal is really to be creative and provide different models. And the best way like to is really to just go to the Bob website, sign up for the newsletter, and then over the next couple of weeks, you'll see like a lot of interesting new vaults launch. And then you can take a look if it matches your risk profile. And I think, by the end of the year, you'll have a series of different yield markets that you can then use in DeFi as collateral to borrow stable coins. And then you can use stable coins to find yield or just actually, use stable coins, right? So you can.
I mean, it's really nice to say like an asset specific focus, because then you can actually, go really deep and figure out how to make that asset productive, which you're doing. Like it's one thing to give yield on something, but then you're coming up with different ways to provide yield. And then that creates different products. And then like we will also have different institutions, different types of users come into the Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem, which still seems like it's in the early days, but the signs are positive. Like the crypto Twitter discourse always ends at, oh, L2s were hyped, or like Bitcoin L2s were hyped and nothing came out of it. But it sounds like just like any other narrative, there was a lot of hype and a lot of teams came and went, but the real teams are still out there building.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like to be fair, I think, you could call Bob a Bitcoin L2. I think what's more accurate is it's a hybrid chain, which is a unique design. Which is like, I guess, closer to an L1 than most L2s, because like we know it has a very unique consensus mechanism that inherits like security and finality from multiple chains. But at the same time, it's a middleware, right? It allows you to interoperate between Bitcoin, native BTC, and 14 different chains. Like as of it's on private beta on mainnet, and will be released to the public I mean, I don't know when this airs, so let's see. And it's probably like, I don't like this whole like these boxes of, oh, it's a Bitcoin L2 and they're all the same. It's every project is quite unique. That's why L1s are so popular, because L1 indicates it's unique, it's a different thing, and L2s are always like seen as similar because I had all these general purpose ETH L2s that did the same thing. Bob is very unique in its design. It's built to provide access to Bitcoin DeFi both on Bob and on different chains. And it basically, the bet here is, if DeFi grows wherever, we'll grow with it. The more volume, the better for us.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for taking the time to educate me and everyone who's going to watch this about the Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem. And hopefully a year from now, when we're looking at DeFi volumes and like TVL, Bitcoin is at top and Bob is up there as well.
Cool. Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Thanks
Have
a
a
lot
nice
for your
one.
time.
Bye-bye.